All right, let's get into the message. I'm excited to continue our series, Missing Peace. Can you turn in your Bibles, if you have them or if you've got your phone, to Psalms 142. We're going to be hanging out in Psalms 142 today, and I am very, very excited to share this message with you. I am pumped about the Word of God today. I really am. So I'm going to share it with all my heart. I'm going to share it with some passion, and I hope we're expectant today. But I'm excited to hang out in Psalms 142 with us today. Can I go ahead and read this to you? Let me read Psalms. It says, I cry aloud to the Lord. I lift up my voice to the Lord for mercy. I pour out before him my complaint. Before him I tell my trouble. When my spirit grows faint within me, it is you who watch over my way. In the path where I walk, the next verse, people have hidden a snare for me. Look and see, there is no one at my right hand. No one is concerned for me. I have no refuge. No one cares for my life. He goes on and he says, I have no refuge. No one cares for my life. Is that all we have? I'll continue to read. He says, no one cares for my life. I have no refuge. I cry to you, Lord. I say, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. He says, listen to my cry, for I am in desperate need. Rescue me from those who pursue me, for they are too strong for me. Set me free from my prison, that I may praise your name. Psalms 142. I want to share a message from this verse to you, and I want to theme this message. I want to title it, Peace in a Hard Place. Peace in a hard place. So we just read this psalm, and this psalm was written by David. And you might know or might not know David, who he is from the Bible, and that's okay if you don't. But what David, this guy in the scriptures, this character, this person in the scriptures, he's here. He writes this psalm from a cave. And as you can probably tell, David is not going through a very good time right now. He is not having the best of times in this particular moment of his life. The truth is, David, when he writes this psalm, he is actually on the run. The truth is, in his home country, the king had recently just turned against him. And so now David actually fears for his life. So he is actually on the run. And so first David runs to this place called Nob. Can somebody say Nob? Nob. So now hopefully as you read the story of David, you'll be able to recognize some of these places. First David, he runs to this place called Nob. And see, Nob had these priests that were there. And so David runs to the priests, hoping that they are going to be able to protect him. And what happens is it doesn't really work out that way. The king shows up, and as you read the story, he kills the priests. And so David just gets desperate. And he runs to this place called Gath. Can somebody say Gath? He runs to a place called Gath. But the problem with Gath is, does anybody know the story of David and Goliath? Y'all know that story? Now you know who David is? So David and Goliath, you know, the slingshot and the stones kills the giant Goliath, David. Gath is Goliath's hometown. So it is not a good place for David to be, okay? He becomes so desperate that he runs to enemy territory. He runs to Gath. And it is kind of comical at this point. In Nob, he actually grabs Goliath's sword and then thinks it's a good idea to carry it to Gath. Like, Goliath was like this really prominent person in his city, the greatest of all warriors. And David walks around Gath hoping to not be recognized with Goliath's sword. he is not making very smart decisions at this point. He's desperate. He has no idea where to go. He has no idea where to turn. He is afraid. He is running. He feels alone. And so what actually happens in the story is David, hoping to not be recognized, that actually doesn't work out. He's carrying Goliath's sword, doesn't work out. He gets recognized, obviously, and what he has to do is he has to pretend to be out of his mind in order to escape. And the story gets kind of crazy, and so he does. He pretends to be out of his mind, and he's running for his life. He's desperate. He leaves Gath. He has no idea where to go. And then 1 Samuel 22, if you could put the verse up, tells us this. It says that David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And it is in this cave that David puts pen to parchment paper and writes Psalm 142. But I want you to see, the psalm is art. The psalms are not just information. It's supposed to move us, to cause something on the inside of us to awaken. And so I don't want you to just hear about the cave. I want you to see the cave. So if you could, for a moment, take a look at the screens.
Wow, this is incredible.
It is so much larger in here than I expected.
There are caves heading off in that direction. There's caves heading off in this direction. I can see light down here, so there must be another opening down there somewhere. This is the perfect place for David to hide. He's up high. He could easily go outside this cave. He could see for miles around him.
A natural fortified location. How deep does this cave system go?
You know, I have no idea. You want to go find out?
David's time here at the Cave of Adullam was very short, and only a couple of verses in 1 Samuel 22 that mention that. Even though it's mentioned so briefly, obviously it makes sense why he came here. Look at how much this opens up in here.
This is huge.
Oh, there's a bat flying around over there. And another tunnel leading out. There are little nooks and crannies all over the place. There's a place for a millstone, a small millstone.
Hey, look over here. Look over here.
Wow. It looks like an entrance.
How deep does it go?
It looks like the wall used to continue around. Maybe it's been backfilled. But the cave continues on the other side.
There's just room after room.
Oh, man. Look at this.
Oh, my.
It was surreal to think about this being the spot where David hid out, and to wonder which of these entrances was the one that he used every day. Which of these places was the place where he slept? And to think about this cavern being filled up with the people that had come to him, with the soldiers, his mighty men. Could 400 people really have met up with David and hid out here? Once you got into the cave system, it could easily house as many people as the text says that came and united with David here. It felt like we had gone through a time warp back to that day, and you might see David walking around at any moment.
running for his life. And often you read these stories and you think about David, and it's so old, isn't it? It's like, it's fairy tale, it's story, isn't it? But David penned this psalm in that cave. And what was he feeling in that cave as you read this psalm? He was feeling alone. He was feeling despair. And what Psalm 142 is for you and for me, it is a very real, not a fairy tale, it is a very real moment in David's life as he deals with all that he's facing, all that he's going through, trying to find peace and move forward in the midst of everything that he's facing. And so I want to share with you 3 things from this psalm on our journey to peace. Because the truth is, something as we have this conversation about peace, what we've got to understand and acknowledge is that peace is often a journey. And there are times where we struggle. There are times where you don't have peace. No matter what you do, no matter how much you pray, you don't feel peace. And we've got to acknowledge and know it is okay to struggle. We all do. And peace is often a journey. So what does it look like for us to journey to peace in the hard places, in the difficult moments, in the cave? How do we journey towards a peace, a real peace? Not a cheap peace, not a fake peace, but a real peace through all of life's ups and downs. So the first thing I want to share with you is this: peace in a hard place. The first thing I want you to know is where you go in hard times matters. Where you go in hard times matters. Let me read these first verses for you again. He says, I cry aloud. Can you put the verse back up? Psalms 142, 1 and 2. I cry aloud to the Lord. I lift up my voice to the Lord for mercy. I pour out before him my complaint. Before him I tell my trouble. And here's the truth. In difficult moments, in the hard place, you will find a desire to go to something for release, for comfort, for peace. We all do it. It is a part of the human condition. When we are pressed, when we are stressed, when we are anxious, we will all find the desire to go to something for release, for comfort, and for peace. And so the question is, when life is too much, when life comes on you, when you are in the hard place, what do you go to? What do you reach for? Where do you go? And see, it's a part of the human condition that most often, if you are honest with yourself, if we are honest with ourselves, we go to things most often that will distract, that will help us avoid, that will help us to numb. If you look back in those moments, what is it that we want to most naturally go to? It is to something that will help us to ignore our issues, our problems, what we're facing, what we're going through. And I get it, right? I get it. It makes sense. Why? Because it's so much easier, if you're honest, it's so much easier to just turn on the TV. It's so much easier to just go reach for the bottle. It's so much easier to just do this, just do that. It's so much easier. Can we be real? Can we be honest at church? It really is. It's so much easier to distract, to not deal with what's going on. It's so much easier to not face it. But can I be honest with you? That path does not lead to peace. You might be on that path right now. You might be here and you are in the hard place. And you're ignoring, you're distracting, you're avoiding. Oh, I just want you to know that the end result of that is not peace. It is a life of constant distracting, of constant avoiding, of constant ignoring. And if you are to grow and truly journey towards peace, not just a moment of peace, not just a moment of distraction, not just a moment of numbness, but if we are to truly grow and journey towards a peace that is real from the inside out, a peace that is deep within us, where we go matters. Where we go when life presses us, when we go when we're anxious and worried, when we go when we don't have peace, it matters. And David chose God. He chose to cry out to God, to lift his voice to God, to bring his complaints before God. He chose to tell God of his problems. David chose to go to God first. He chose God. But what I need you to see, and this first point makes no sense without the second part. This first part of the psalm makes no sense without the rest of the psalm. What I need you to see is why David chose God. What brought David to this point of choosing God? Was it because he's got to be a good Christian, or because you got to pray first, right? Like, that's what we got to do. I'm a church-going person, so I got to pray first. That's what I do. I go to God. Is that why David chose God? No, it's not. Why did David choose God? Let me read it to you, if we can go on in the verses. In verse 3 and 5, it says, "When my spirit grows faint within me, it is you who watch over my way. In the path where I walk, people have hidden a snare for me. Look and see, there is no one at my right hand. No one is concerned for me. I have no refuge. No one cares for my life." But he says, "I cry to you, Lord. I say, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living." And here's what I want you to see, is that David chose God not because he had to, but because of the relationship he has with him, because of how he knew God. And the second thing I need you to know in the hard place is that if where you go matters, this also matters. How you see God matters. That's my second thought. How you see God matters. David went to God because of the relation, because of how he personally knew him, because of who God actually was in his life. Not in theory, not in I heard that pastor tell it, not in I heard that person say it, but who God was to him. In church, my prayer for us, my prayer for you this week has been that we would be on a journey, church, to know God for ourselves, each one of us, that when we are in a hard place, it's our natural desire, our natural instinct to want to go to God because of who we are knowing him to be, because of who he is in our lives. And I love these verses because David is pouring out his heart, and he just naturally pours out who God is to him. Who is God to him? The first thing he says is, "It is you who watch over my way." He knew that it was God who watches over him. That even though he felt alone, he wasn't alone. That it was God who was with him. He knew God as the God that is always there. The God that is always with him. A God that has never left him, that has never forsaken him. A God that watches over his way. I've honestly had conversations with people who have told me, oh, I don't know if I really want to pray about that. Like, God must be so busy dealing with so many things in this world. And I get it, right? But David didn't know God that way. The way that David knew God is that God can handle all the big things in the world, and he can handle all the little things in my life. That he is the God who watches over my way. That he is the God who is not only able, but loves to, but wants to. It's who he is. It's his character to take care of me, to guard me, to watch over my way. That is the God I know. That is the God I have seen. That is the God who I know. And he goes on. What else does he say? David goes on. He says, you, Lord, are my refuge. You are my refuge. What does that mean? It means God is his safety. He is his place of safety. God is David's safe place. But here's the thing. Often, because of religion, God can feel like anything but a safe space, but a safe place. Oh, you're struggling, you're messing up, you're hurting, you're doubting. Oh, no, you got to fix yourself. You got to get yourself together. You got to act like this. You got to talk like that. You've got to be at this point. You've got to be here. And David's like, that's not the God I know. It's opposite. It's when I need the safe space, when I know that I can bring my full self, everything that I'm feeling, everything that is going on within me. God is my refuge from everything else, from the judgments, from the shame, from the negativity, from the world, from the troubles, from the obstacles, from the issues, from the sickness, whatever you're dealing with. To David, God was the refuge. God was his place of safety. Lord, you are my refuge. Is God your place of safety? Is God your safe space? And you know how we know it's not? When we can't bring all of ourselves to God. But that's not the God that David knows. You are my refuge. And lastly, David says, you are my refuge and my portion. What does that mean? David is saying, God, you are my greatest delight. You are where I find joy, where I find comfort and happiness. You are where I delight in, God. And see, the reality is, and the truth is, what's missing from so many people's walk today is not necessarily that they have to take their walk with God more seriously. Honestly, I think it's that we have not learned how to delight in God. The Westminster Catechism says the chief end of man, meaning the greatest goal of men and women, the greatest purpose to humanity. What is the purpose of humanity? What is the greatest goal? They say the chief end of man is to worship God and to delight in him forever. Is God a delight or a duty? Do we delight in God? Do we know him in that way? And you might not, and that is okay. We are all on a journey, every single one of us. But I just want you to know that God wants to be so much more than just a duty in your life, just a good thing for you to do, just a thing that you should do to be a good person. He wants so much more. The way David knew him, he says, you, Lord, are my portion. In you, I find joy. I find happiness. I find comfort. I find peace. I find delight. I find delight. It's in you, Lord. Do we know God in that way? See, here's the truth. If where you go in hard times matters, how you see God matters. Because if you see God as a distant, unattached being in the sky who just cares about you doing right, not messing up, having stuff together, who just wants you to go to church on Sundays and make sure that you give and make sure that you do this and make sure that you do that. That's what you should, if that's how you see God, that's like me trying to convince you right now to want to go to that wall in hard times. Where you go matters, so go to that wall. It cares nothing for you. You will not be convinced. It's like, why would I go there? You will never go to God if you don't know who he is. You will never want to go to God if you don't know his character, if you don't know who he is and what he's like. And to David, that made all the difference. He chose God. He went to God because who he has been in his life, who he has seen and known personally, God to be. And so the last thing I have for you today is, if where you go in hard times matters, then how you see God matters. And this is the one thing I want you to know today. The best way to go to God is honestly. The best way how do I go to God? I'm not very religious. It's my first time at church. I don't even know how to pray. I don't think I've ever prayed. What does going to God mean? I have no idea. I don't know what that means. The best way to go to God is honestly. See, the truth is, the cave is an incredible classroom. Spurgeon says, the cave has heard the best of prayers. What does that mean? It means that in hard times, in times when we are pressed, in times when we are struggling, in times when we are in the hard place, those are moments and places for us to come to God and for encounter God and to come to him in a way that is deeper than before. Those are spaces and places for us to come to God and to know him in a deeper way than we have before. See, David chose not to distract, ignore, avoid, but he chose to cry out. He chose to lift his voice. He chose to bring his complaints. David chose to bring the good, the bad, and the ugly. And the reality is, in these seasons and in these moments, they draw us closer to God, because it's not just knowing in theory that he's our safe place, it's experiencing him. It's not just a good thought a good verse on the screen that God is our refuge, but it is living in it. And can I be honest? Some of you have never felt close to God because you've never been fully honest with Him. Your doubts with how you're really feeling, how you're really doing, what you're really thinking. The best way that you can go to God is honestly. And my prayer for you is in those seasons, in the hard place, in those seasons of the cave, that they would be your very best prayers. Not because they are the prettiest, but because they are the most honest. That is my prayer for you. That in the hard place, in the difficult moments, you would find God there with you. You would know God in a way that you never have before, because it opens up the deepest parts of you. It opens up the things that are deepest on the inside of you. And when you can bring those things to Him, not just the good, not just the stuff you can pull together, not just the fancy Christian lingo that you can muster up, not just the thing you heard the pastor say, but when you can bring yourself, the good, the bad, and the ugly, to God. I love that David says, before you I tell my complaint. We all know we don't want to complain, but have you ever complained to God? David's like, I have. That's the first thing I did in this cave. I wrote out my complaints to God. I cried out to God. And so I want to end with this. I want you to know, and I need you to know, often we can read these stories and think they're fairy tale. And often we can think of God and we can think, oh, he's up there. He is God. How could he understand? How could he understand any of this? How can we relate? He is God and I am just human. I want to read this verse to you in Hebrews, and I want to end with this. It says, since we have a great high priest, it's talking about Jesus, who has entered heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to what we believe. This high priest of ours understands our weaknesses, for he faced all of the same testings we do, yet he did not, next slide, sin. So let us come fake, put together. So let us come with just like really good Christian lingo and stuff. So let us come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. There we will receive His mercy, and we will find grace to help us when we need it the most. See, the reality is, before this high priest of ours, before Jesus entered heaven, He experienced the cave. He was betrayed. He was abandoned. He was left alone. He was flogged. He was crucified. And He was buried in a cave for 3 days. This high priest of ours experienced the depths of the cave Himself. God Himself put on flesh, became human, came down to earth, and experienced the cave. And I need you to know this morning that He understands. I need you to know this morning that he knows the pain. He knows the hardships. He knows what you're feeling and going through. He understands. And this God will meet you right where you're at when you come to him as you are. Can we stand and can we pray?